right, welcome everybody to Artful Tuesdays. Today I have Tom Nowak, and we are going to be talking about a fun, light, easy poem by William Wordsworth. This is definitely a fun, enjoyable poem for me. I am only kidding about it being light. It's considered a pretty heavy, deep poem. If you're familiar with Wordsworth, he's already a pretty heavy guy sometimes. And I've done some poetry on Wordsworth, but this will be, I think, a good one. Now, before you turn off and like, hey, this is too hard, I don't want to deal with it, I wanted to set up with Tom, and I wanted to talk about some ideas getting into the poem and why I think it's valuable to be excited and to what's going on. There's deep value in this poem and in the challenge of facing it.
And keep in mind, I have no classical training for this or experience. I'm just an engineer, and I'm interested in learning more about poetry. So this is going to be a fun ride.
Yeah. So I actually did a show about this a couple of years ago, and I did it at the end of the year. I might have done it like 2020, 2019, at the end of 2019 for like a year-end reflection. And Tom, you were telling me you're 27, right?
Just turned 27.
Yeah. Just turned 27. Happy birthday.
Thanks.
Now, birthdays, we often reflect on the past a little bit sometimes, and sometimes we look into the future. I think as you get older, reflecting on the past should take some semblance of it, where you're taking stock of your past and events that have occurred, things that are going on. So you take stock in order to go forward is the hopeful idea, right? To push into the next thing. So, you're at an interesting age for this poem because Wordsworth was not far off from your age. I think he was like 2 years older than you when he wrote this poem. And one of the things that I find personally really interesting about this, and I'm wondering if you've had this experience in life, I'm sure you have, but now at 27, have you ever taken a younger person somewhere where you've in the past, and you're like 7 years, like when you were 20 or 18 or 16, where you've had a powerful experience and you took someone there, and it could be artistic experience, it could be a travel experience, it could be an architectural experience. Like you try to drag someone here who has not experienced something where you've had an experience with it. Like it was powerful for you, and especially powerful in the past. Well, obviously it was in the past, but especially if it was something like, from your teenage years or when you were 20, it doesn't have to be, but just something in the past. And, do you have an event like that? And I could start by having some ideas about this while if you need time to think.
Does it have to be a physical location, or can it be just an experience that I've shared that I had at some point and I wanted to replicate with a younger person?
Well, what are you speaking of?
Well, I mean, I like when people who are still in college or younger than me like get exposed to philosophy for the first time, and actually they have that moment, they understand that it's actually relevant to them. I've seen that happen, and it's really awesome.
So I think, that's part of it. I think that's one thing. I mean, that's one example, is like taking someone to read a book that you like, to kind of see their reaction to it and your experience. And so that's one type of experience, is the intellectual experience, right? I mean, do you like do you like any sports at all? I mean, you like architecture.
I do like architecture, yes.
So have you ever, can you think of a profound experience you've had in a physical space? So what's a profound experience you've had, especially early on in your architectural interest? Or with like even, trains, or, I know you're into engineering, or you're an engineer, and are there any experiences like that you could think of in your youth?
Yeah, I think taking visitors to Union Station in Toronto is fun, because
that's a good example. So
I'm familiar with it, and
the familiarity is important to what I'm saying. Yeah. So you're familiar with this thing. You know it, right? And now you've been to this Union Station. I've never been there. Union Station, you said?
Yeah.
In Toronto. So you've been there a couple of times, I imagine, more than once.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember your first time going?
I remember my maybe not the first time ever, but the first time I actually took it all in was probably when I was just a co-op student. And
what is that?
Oh, it's like an intern for school.
Okay.
And our office was actually in Union Station because I was working for the government transit agency. And they have all these like hidden offices and back doors all around the station. And so you actually get a good taste of how it's laid out through that job, because you're walking in and out of these sort of hidden doors all the time. And then the main area is kind of like an atrium that you don't really walk into a lot. But, like those bigger train stations, they have a huge waiting area with like a domed ceiling. And it's just magnificent to look at.
Okay. So, and then you've brought someone there. Have you ever brought someone that was important to you there?
Oh, yeah.
And did that person have a good reaction to it?
He came with the camera and was looking for good shots, so I kind of pointed out things and
yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a good spot, and that's a good idea. And we were just taking it all in. It wasn't anything serious, like he was just looking for fun shots, but we had a really good time there.
Yeah, I mean, some other examples people have told me in the past is like, there's the cliche of like in America, Grand Canyon type thing, right? So you go to the Grand Canyon as a kid, or when you're a teenager, and maybe you don't think it's a big deal, and then you walk up to this thing and it's like, whoa, it's this massive. Have you ever seen the Grand Canyon?
No, but I mean, similar to us is maybe Niagara Falls.
Or Niagara Falls. Like I've seen Niagara Falls as a kid myself on the American side. But the idea of this grand thing, it has this big impact on you. It means something. And then, 8-10 years later, you bring someone who's never seen it, and you yourself cannot replicate that first experience.
No.
Right? Like when that first experience is a first and never changing, like you cannot recreate that yourself. You could still feel profound love about Grand Canyon. You could still enjoy it, but there's a kind of almost tempering of it. It's just not as intense as that first time. But the other person, and if you go with the right person who appreciates certain things that you do in a genuine way, right? Like they might have that same kind of reaction. So another example in a completely different world of what I'm trying to get at in terms of these experiences that fade for you as you see it, as you experience it, just doesn't have it. But then you have another counterpart that it does have that same experience for them. And you're kind of able to get almost like a sharing of the beam that comes off of them, right? Like that, the power from the sense that they have that you can't really fully get anymore, even though you love it and you've had it and you have a different sense. It's new. So like one example, which is really simple, is on YouTube, and I've talked about this before, but on YouTube, there are these reaction videos and I first ran into this in COVID and super lonely times. And it was an interesting psychological thing I was thinking about was I was, just sitting in a room by myself, just lonely with nobody. And I would watch something like Game of Thrones, like the series. And it was really just like, if you look at these things, and they have millions of views, some of these, hundreds of thousands of views, the better ones. And not just one, like there's multiple people who've watched all of Game of Thrones, put it up there, all 7 or 8 seasons, what was it, 8 seasons? I don't know if the last one counts, right? All of the seasons together, and they watch it. There's like Band of Brothers, and there's multiple people who've done it. Multiple ones who've got hundreds of thousands and even millions of views. And it's like, what are you watching when you watch that? You're watching their reaction, right? You're not even like they actually edit it all up so you don't even watch the whole episode because they can't for copyright reasons, right? It's just like the best moments essentially. They usually will go through the whole, from start to finish, but then cut it together. And I was thinking about like why do people love this so much? Why are millions of people watching other people watch a TV show that they've already seen and love? Right? This isn't like how someone first experiences Game of Thrones. You don't do a reaction video to something you're just experiencing it. You're doing a reaction. You're watching someone on YouTube experiencing something you love, and you're experiencing it through them in a sense. And you're kind of, and I would even say that this is a really good training ground for even finding friends and romantic partners, because I'm sure a lot of people have had this experience where you have a movie you've loved in the past, right? And you really love it, and you share it with someone that you're dating, and you're like looking at them the whole time, waiting for the expression that you want them to have, which, by the way, I think is a bad idea because it ruins it for them. You need to like really let them experience it for themselves versus like, oh, what do you think? What do you think? They're like, I don't know. Just enjoy the movie. Calm down. Right? Like, don't do that, just as a tip. But why do we do that? Like, what is it in us? There's something in us that does that. And I think that's there's something very profound in our connections. And that, I think, is that's part of what I wanted to talk about with this poem today. And there's a lot more to talk about, but I wanted to set it up. I know it was a long setup, but I hope you guys enjoyed that idea of experiencing something that you love with someone else who has never experienced it. That this poem is the first YouTube reaction video poem, but it's about an old abbey that has been crumbling, and there's all these, it's being overtaken by nature. And that's what we're going to read today, is Tintern Abbey. Okay, so all that for the setup. Hopefully the poem lives up to it. All right. So any comments before we read this? So I'm gonna do this reading this time. Now, you just read it for the first time ever, so we get to see your facial experience though as you're going through it, or as I'm reading through it, and you're gonna go through.
Yeah. So I went through it for about 5 to 10 minutes. Just read through it once or twice and understand the basic structure of it. I don't think I had like a big aha moment. So I might actually experience that this time we read it through, since I'm a bit more familiar with the phrases now and sort of a little bit of what's going on in each paragraph. So I'm excited, and hopefully the audience is as well.
All right, great. So I always recommend to reread these things anyway, right? I've read this several times. I haven't re-experienced this myself in actually like a year or so. So I'm interested in how I go through this. So let's go through this poem. The poem's called, this is the actual title, Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey on Revisiting the Banks of the Wee during a tour, July 13th, 1798. So it's lines composed. He's up, picture him up on this hill overlooking this abbey, right? It's called Tintern Abbey, but it's an abbey. All right, here we go. July 13th, 1798. Here's the beginning of the poem. 5 years have passed, 5 summers, with the length of 5 long winters. And again I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a soft inland murmur. Once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs that on a wild, secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day has come when I again repose here under this dark sycamore and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchid tufts, which at this season with their unripe fruits are clad in one green hue and lose themselves mid groves and copses. Once again, I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild, these pastoral farms green to the very door, and wreaths of smoke sent up in silence from among the trees. With some uncertain notice, as might seem of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave, where by his fire the hermit sits alone. These beauteous forms, through a long absence, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft, in lonely rooms, and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them, in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood, and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration. Feelings, too, of unremembered pleasure, such, perhaps, as have no slight or trivial influence of that best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. Nor less, I trust, to them I may have owed another gift, of aspect more sublime. That blessed mood in which the burden of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened. That serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on, until the breath of this corporeal frame, and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul. While with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. If this be but a vain belief, yet oh, how oft, in darkness and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir unprofitable and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how oft in spirit have I turned to thee, O Sylvan Wye, thou wanderer through the woods? How often has my spirit turned to thee? And now, with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revives again. While here I stand, not only with the sense of present pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years. And so I dare to hope, though changed, no doubt, from what I was when first I came among these hills, when like a roe I bounded o'er the mountains, by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams, wherever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. For nature, then, the coarser pleasures of my boyish days and their glad animal movements all gone by, to me was all in all. I cannot paint what then I was. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy wood, their colors and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling and a love that had no need of a remoter charm, by thought supplied, not any interest unborrowed from the eye. That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Not for this faint eye, nor mourn nor murmur. Other gifts have followed. For such loss, I would believe abundant recompense. For I have learned to look on nature not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and mountains, and of all that we behold from this green earth, of all the mighty world of eye and ear, both what they half create and what perceive, well pleased to recognize in nature and the language of the sense the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul, of all my moral being. Nor perchance, if I were not thus taught, should I the more suffer my genial spirits to decay. For thou art with me here upon the banks of this fair river, thou, my dearest friend, my dear, dear friend. And in thy voice I catch the language of my former heart, and read my former pleasures in the shooting lights of thy wild eyes. Oh, yet a little while may I behold in thee what I was once, my dear, dear sister. And this prayer I make, knowing that nature never did betray the heart that loved her. 'Tis her privilege through all the years of this our life to lead from joy to joy, for she can so inform the mind that is within us, so impress with quietness and beauty, and so feed with lofty thoughts, that neither evil tongues, rash judgments, nor the sneers of selfish men, nor greetings where no kindness is, nor all the dreary intercourse of daily life shall e'er prevail against us, or disturb our cheerful faith, that all which we behold is full of blessings. Therefore let the moon shine on thee in thy solitary walk, and let the misty mountain winds be free to blow against thee. And in after years, when these wild ecstasies shall be matured into a sober pleasure, when thy mind shall be a mansion for all lovely forms, thy memory be as a dwelling place for all sweet sounds and harmonies. Oh, then if solitude, or fear, or pain, or grief should be thy portion, with what healing thoughts of tender joy wilt thou remember me, and these my exhortations? Nor, perchance, if I should be where I no more can hear thy voice, nor catch from thy wild eyes these gleams of past existence, wilt thou then forget that on the banks of this delightful stream we stood together, and that I, so long a worshipper of nature, hither came unwearied in that service? Rather say with warmer love, with far deeper zeal of holier love. Nor wilt thou then forget that after many wanderings, many years of absence, these steep woods and lofty cliffs and this green pastoral landscape were to me more dear, both for themselves and for thy sake. The end.
Interesting. I
Pick anything else up?
I definitely went somewhere in my head while you were talking. Not like zoned out, but I was thinking about a few experiences I've had where, because I was really thinking back to the examples you gave at the start, and you asked me, is there somewhere you've been and then you took someone else that was important to you? And I was thinking about that. And I can remember a few good situations where it was like, I would take someone on a bike ride on a path that I knew pretty well, but they didn't at all. And I would know all the houses that I really liked to talk about, and the views of the city, and how, I had seen all these things a few times already and they were quite commonplace to me, but I had time to reflect on it. and then they see it for the first time, and I get to sort of see their reaction as we're going through it, and I get to talk about things and reflect on it, and yeah, then it's like sort of a tender moment too, because you don't want to ruin it for them, but
Yeah.
at the same time, you're hoping that nature can do its magic in the same way that it did to you, right? And I don't mean nature as in like just the natural world. I mean, it can happen with the physical, or just all the built physical world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's definitely that experience of being in your youth and going somewhere that's maybe a big park or a forest or some kind of natural wonder, and maybe not being able to grasp how cool it is, and then coming back and reflecting on it and saying, wow, this is awesome, but then you don't have the same it doesn't have the same new effect. So as you go to these places,
that time has passed.
Yeah.
And all its aching joys are now no more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all its dizzy raptures. Right?
Yeah. But it's replaced with something else. And I think he mentions that.
Recompense.
The recompense.
Other gifts have followed for such loss. I would believe abundant recompense. For I have learned to look on nature not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, right? But hearing oftentimes the still sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And he talks, there's another place, but he basically is replacing it with thoughtfulness, the philosophical mind, he might call it, and an ability to see in a way that a younger person won't be able to see. And that's the recompense. That's what he's getting in return, right? So that's what you get. Like your first experience, you use the example of philosophy. So your first experience when you first started getting into philosophy was all these profound feelings, but there was probably very little understanding.
Yeah.
To some degree, right?
It was exciting. It was exciting because you find this new thing that you don't understand yet. Right? But you have very little understanding of the implications, the deep, profound impacts of it. And that doesn't necessarily happen with, just like a conceptual thing like philosophy. It happens in the world too, like going up the CN Tower for the first time and witnessing that height that CN Tower is one of the tallest buildings in at least North America. So going up it the first time is just, wow, cool, right? But then the second time, you start looking at other things. You say, oh, I'm a bit more familiar with this, thinking about, or like the construction of it and how we got to where we are now. Yeah,
you have a lot of detail and content and experiences filled in, when at first you had a kind of a naked, just emotional reaction to just the sight and the grandness of it. And you could still feel that later on, but it's probably not going to be quite as intense as when you first felt it. That intensity is subdued and chastened a little bit, but you're given in return a kind of grander understanding in a sense.
And I will say that there's something else important about this is that the last what do you call it, stanza of how he's now seeing it with someone else that he cares about. I think witnessing these kinds of places with someone that you have a deep personal relationship with is a really amazing part of life.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that. I was thinking about, previous relationships I've been in and doing this thing. And like, that is the best part of these. Well, it's one of the best parts of these relationships really, is like experiencing what you value and enjoy and have had time to really sit on with someone else
Yeah.
who is not as experienced. And like, you know, it also is opening your heart up a little bit. It's like it's being slightly vulnerable and
Mm-hmm.
in waiting for, anticipating what their response is to it.
And they do the same thing with you.
Yeah.
And so you get the, and you ask yourself if you're giving them what they want, of course, too, right? But yeah, that's 100%. I think that's correct. And I think that's also one of the many reasons why the early stages, the honeymoon stages of a relationship can be even more intense, because there does come a point in a relationship where all those experiences you've had together, like there's got to be a limit to that, right? So, you've taken them to the 10 things you love most on the earth. It's like, well, now you got to go to the 11th, but now you're doing it with them. So the nature of your relationship changes now. And now you're going to have your first experience of something new with this person. But hopefully it's the type of person who you can read the language of your former heart in them, and read my former pleasures in the shooting lights of their wild eyes, which is, he's talking in this poem, Wordsworth is talking about his sister, who is experiencing the beauty of what he's seeing, standing on this hill overlooking this, abbey that's been crumbling for generations, and it's being overtaken by nature, and there's a hermit living in a cave or in the place over there. But it's like this whole scene that is just, there's a kind of, he looks at it as like a beauty, and he sees the same kind of beauty or experience that he had 5 years earlier in her. And so remember, the poetry beginnings are really important, right? So 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters. And again, I hear I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a soft inland murmur. And he has a whole bunch of once agains. He's trying to get you to understand that he's, this is him coming back to this place, right? That's how he's starting the poem. Once again, do I behold these steep and lofty hills. Once again, I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild, right? Like bushes he's seeing down. He's describing the scene below. So if I can give one piece of advice for reading poetry, you need to try to visualize what he's talking about. Do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs? Don't just see the words. Try to picture steep and lofty cliffs on a wild, secluded scene to impress thoughts of more deep seclusion and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day has come when I again repose here under a dark sycamore tree and view these plots of cottage ground. So there's little cottages in there. These orchard tufts, which at this season with their unripe fruits are clad in one green hue. Now there have been paintings of this poem and this series, so you can look that up, see how painters have done that. Once again, I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild. These pastoral farms, green to the very door. So just imagine, greenery, all like just this city intertwined. Like I think like this is almost like a in fantasy, like the way the elves live in Lord of the Rings, right? Very integrated into nature in a way. And I think that's what he admires about that. Because he was a romantic. The Industrial Revolution had just barely getting started. It's like, what is this, 1798, right? And he's admiring this way of doing it. So anyway, he calls all that stuff, those beauteous forms through a long absence, have not been to me as a landscape to a blind man's eye. What do you think of that? So all the beauteous forms I was just describing and more, though there's been a long absence, they've not been in his absence, or he's talking about his absence, have not been a landscape to a blind man's eye. What does that mean?
They have not been a landscape to a blind man's eye.
Have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. All those beautiful things, he's been gone for 5 years. All those beautiful things have not been to him as is a landscape to a blind man. What is a landscape to a blind man's eye?
It's nothing. Like you can't visualize, you can't see it.
So what is he saying about?
He remembers it.
Yeah, exactly. And you so again with great poetry, you have to do a little bit of translation. They don't want to. He's not a boring prose writer. By the way, I knew this, when I left 5 years ago, these, little trees that I saw, I remembered them. The end. That's a prose writer. This is a great poet. They don't do that. They make you do the work. So what do you think he's trying to say though, when he's saying that in that long absence, they have not been a blind man? Like, what's the purpose of saying that? Of reminding you of that?
They're worthy of being remembered.
And often in lonely rooms, when he's been alone, amid the din of towns and cities, he went to London and Paris. He saw the last time he saw this, at what, 765? Last time he saw this, it was the Parisian, the French Revolution.
That's a good historical connection there.
Of towns and cities. Well, even if you don't know that, by the way, but think about what he's saying here. Like those, like what you just said, that those images have been with me even when I left.
Mm-hmm.
And often in lonely rooms and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them, to those forms, in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration. Feelings too of unremembered. What do you think he's saying about all this though? Again, he's talking about this memory of this place. So 5 years he's been gone. In that 5 years absence, he's held them in what types of times in his life? When he was making love to a woman, was he remembering these hills?
Probably not.
But when was he remembering these hills?
It's when he's been lonely, when he's been under stress. Mm-hmm. I think it mentions later, when he feels the burden of people and all their misery that they bring. Mm-hmm. He simply remembers this abandoned abbey and its tranquility, and that mm-hmm. gives him some inner calm to look into.
Yeah, so he's talking about the power of these images in, think about the word imagination, the creation of images in your mind. This is what imagination means to him, mm-hmm. is to see this detail of this scene overlooking all the nature, the cottages, the abbey, the trees, the copses, and then taking that with him when he leaves for 5 years.
This setting is sort of an archetype. There's a lot of imagery and settings that are like this. I mean, for instance, I hate to take us away out of this, but in the latest Zelda game, you start out on a little plateau that's fairly safe, right? And the first building you see is this abandoned monastery. Yeah. And it's covered in moss, and you end up climbing up it on the roof, and you oversee everything. So it's interesting how these archetypes of settings pass through the ages, and it's trying to evoke the same feeling, I think, in both cases of this abandoned.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely, they're pulling on certain traditions. Yeah, I would say that Zelda's probably pulling on Wordsworth more than Wordsworth is pulling on Zelda. Of course. But so Wordsworth is kind of creating this romantic imagery, right? So a lot of this imagery and it's not to say that there was never pastoral poetry and views in the past. There always, of course there was, but he is getting to a visual secular reverence in a way that I think has never really been done before him. He is kind of starting that. And he's doing something really unique with the mind. So for him, it's not just about, love nature for its sake, right? It's what it does for you, in a sense. It's the beauty that it brings to you. It gives you a quiet power. We are laid asleep in body and become a living soul. Now, there's a lot there's unfortunately some, very religious stuff in here. He does believe in a kind of continuity of your soul, I think is what you're getting out of here. But he's still in his best attempt as an honest poet in living in his era. And he's not a grand philosophical thinker. He's a poet. He's trying to get at this thing of what is the power that nature, poetry gives to you, right? See into the life of things. And there's a famous quote from the Prelude where he was given the instructions, and he puts this in poetic verse: instruct them how the mind of man becomes 1,000 times more beautiful than the earth on which he dwells, which is the purpose of all of his art, in a sense, is to instruct us how the mind of man becomes 1,000 times more beautiful than the earth on which he dwells. So part of what you get, I think, in this poem, and he's experiencing this through his sister at one point, but part of what you get is like what this scene is doing to him and what it's done to his mind over the years. And now with gleams of half extinguished thoughts, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revives again. And the mind is, in a sense, I guess, maybe structured or altered in the way that he's able to perceive this scene, experience it over time, and understand its meaning. So there is that you can get throughout this some meaning in all of this. There's so much of this poem. You could take so much. We could take like all day and every night to talk about this. So, but he talks about like the hermit, for instance, and its relationship to being a good moral man. And he talks about like the sad music of humanity, right? So this is again happening. He's writing this in a time. So sometimes historical knowledge helps a little bit. And I don't think you have to have it, but it adds an extra, definitely a layer, especially to literature. But he's writing in a time of intense upheaval. I mean, just France and Britain are at war, right? They're at war. They've been at war for several years. I think they're still at war in 1790. I'm not sure when the war ends, but there was a French Revolution. Britain is worried about it. There was, Britain had a kind of a big revolution happen to them, or war happened with them with one of their colonies just a couple of decades earlier, and they're still reeling from that, right? And everything is changing massively. The whole world is changing, and he's trying to figure out, how can we navigate our lives in this? How can we understand some good in experiencing this when you have all this upheaval, all this murder, death, killing, changing of the guard, in a sense?
You gotta picture the Abbey.
What's that?
You gotta remember the Abbey. That's how you get through it.
So for him, it's remember the Abbey. Yeah. Remember the image of the Abbey and what it means.
Mm-hmm.
Well, remember, it's a crumbling Abbey. Yeah. So it's an Abbey so think about what an Abbey is. So again, he's writing about these destructions, or he's writing at a time when all these destructions are happening. And the French Revolution is about, a lot of that old power that's represented in abbeys and strong church and state. And, there was a constitution that said no more of that, not that early, not that much before that in here. And again, this isn't about that exactly, but it is about something about nature remains with us.
I encourage the audience to actually look up Tintern Abbey paintings on Google Images and just go through it, because they are beautiful, romantic depictions of this scene. We're like, just looking at this painting while I'm reading this it makes the experience a lot more vivid.
What's the painting?
I can share it for sure.
Yeah, let's see it.
So this one to me is,
this is the one I've seen.
This is my favorite, just in terms of what it depicts. Maybe I could try to find some higher quality. No, that one's not as good. This one, I like this one the most. I think, you see the sky in the background it's calm.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't look like there's any motion in this painting going on, even though there's people. I mean, you don't need to notice the people to make this a good painting in my eyes, because
it gives it a sense of scale, and it's interesting. And
yeah.
What about this John Warwick Smith one? Down.
This one.
That one. Yeah, the Met.
This one.
I like this one. This one gives me a real sense of what he might have. So like on the left-hand side, that's where I picture him standing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. He's up there on the left at the very top.
Yeah.
And he's looking down on this whole valley.
Yeah.
And that's how I see Wordsworth is where he is. And he sees this abbey, he sees people working, they're living their lives, sees these cottages, this little copse, and these wooded trees, and he's reflecting on humanity and life and individuality and his consciousness and the era that he's living in. Right? It's not a coincidence that he put 1798 in there. July 13, 1798. Like he said, almost like it's a journalist. I mean, it's almost like he's writing a journal. Right? It's like it's not just some profound thing of poetry, which it is. It's a journal. And this is 1789. This is actually a couple years before, or 10 years before, almost 9 years before. Is this 1789? That's interesting. So I mean, that's another interesting thing about this. So if it's 1789, Tintern Abbey was already kind of well known and depicted in probably in paintings and things like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is a good one.
I like this one too.
It's a good one. Yeah.
Oh, I guess this is just a website showing all of them.
Yeah, I've seen this. There's a whole bunch. That's a good one. Yeah, because you have the guy here again. So again, he's up in one of these hills. I imagine him looking down on this wooded, and here's that cottage he's talking about. Maybe this is the hermit that he's talking about. What do you think?
Totally could be. Totally.
Could be that hermit, the good man hermit. So there's at least one passage before we ended that I wanted to talk about. I mean, there's a lot of passages, but there's one powerful one in particular. I wanted to get your thoughts on it. So it comes in this. Remember, this is pretty early on, or I guess it's midway through, before he talks about his sister. And he really seems, for me, I feel him getting like really reverential in a sense. Like it's really religious, which I love, like a secular religion, probably pretty strong hints of actual supernaturalism in it a little bit, but again, there's no getting. It's 1798. He's doing his best.
Yeah.
The picture he's had is reviving him again. And while here I stand, not only with the sense of pleasant pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts. And in these moments, there's life and blood for future years, right? So this is something to feed on. Like the image, just like for the 5 years he's been gone, has been reviving him in times of weariness. He's like, this is going to give me another 10 years of food to feed on, right?
Which is what art does, right?
I mean, what art does. Yeah, exactly.
Treating this as an artful experience.
And if you've read The Fountainhead, the bicycle scene.
Right.
That's like food. He got food from Howard Rourke by seeing that. Food of the mind. So I dare to hope, though changed. He's talking about how he's changed, no doubt, from what I was when I first came among these hills, right? So 5 years earlier when he came, when he's like a roe, like a baby or a child, like a baby deer or whatever, I bounded over mountains by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams. He's talking about himself as like an animal, like a young animal, right? Again, this goes back to that thoughtless youth, just experiencing and full of energy by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams, wherever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. I do think there's a lot of young people in our youth, we do experience that kind of thing more, where it's like, we go from thing to thing to thing. Well, I'm going to try this. I'm going to do this. But there's almost a sense of like flying away from things that versus going towards something you love long range, which takes a little.
It's hard to differentiate.
It's hard to differentiate. And sometimes it takes sobriety and maturity and age to be able to reflect and be like, oh yeah, that's the thing that actually connects what I really love. Right. For nature then, yada, yada, yada. Okay, here's actually the passage. I cannot paint what then I was. So talking about, it's hard for him to even write about what he was really like back then. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion, the tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy wood. Their colors and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling and a love that had no need of a remoter charm, by thought supplied, not any interest unborrowed from the eye. That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Not for this faint eye, nor more, nor murmur, and so on and forth. We could talk about that. How, this is where it says, other gifts have followed. For such loss, I would believe abundant recompense. For I have looked to, but that the sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain. What does this make you think of? What do you think of in this passage here?
Well, I mean, it really rings true from my experience that I like the haunted me like a passion.
Sounding cataract. Yeah. Haunted me like a passion.
Because it's you can never relive the same experience, but you get echoes of it.
Yeah.
In a sense, you're remembering your remembrance of it.
Yeah.
You're remembering your experience of that time, and he's saying that at that time it was not supplied with intellectual ammunition, but now it is. That's I think it's beautiful, and it's supplied with his reflections on the place where he's going.
Yeah.
Is there something that I'm missing here that you'd like to?
No, that's it. I think it's about this. I don't necessarily think there's more you could always get out of it by thinking, like by looking it up, by trying to picture it, for sure. But I think you're getting what I think about it. That's important, is the sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. I think it just sounds nice too. Right? There's something about it that hits you, or hits me, I should say. The tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy wood. I don't know if you notice, my voice kind of changed when I read it, even the first time. And I think it might have been subtle. Maybe you didn't even notice it, but for me, it does. Like, I notice it for myself. And part of it is it just feels something different. Like the sounding, the tall rock, the mountain, the deep and gloomy wood, their colors and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling. Like he's really reflecting on what this felt like in the past. That had no need of a remoter charm, by thought supplied, not any interest unborrowed from the eye. Unborrowed from, how does that mean? Unborrowed from the eye. Like, it's part of, it's an integration with these sights, the cataract, the water, that's a waterfall, right? So the tall rock, the mountain, the gloomy wood, their colors and their forms, the appetite, feel that they're unborrowed from the eye. Like, for me, there's a sense of like his eyes seeing and experiencing this, and that's kind of part of his whole, feeling with this is the way that his eye experiences that. I don't know how else to put it.
In that passage, he's specifically talking about how all of his first experiences in his youth of this area, it's all sensory, right? It's all perception.
All sensory, yeah.
It's all It's all borrowed from the eye, not unborrowed from the eye. Right? But
okay,
as he's maturing, that time has passed, and I like the line, by thought supply, not any interest unborrowed from the eye. So he had no need of that in his youth, but now there's thought supplied and interest unborrowed from the eye, as in his rational thoughts about it.
Yeah.
Is that what you?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's at least it's getting at it, right?
Yeah.
That time has passed, and the time of that extreme joy and pleasure. So I think about this a lot as I'm getting older. It's like, So I think I've said this on, I don't know if I said this on the show before. This, I might have said this to Luke or somebody, one of the shows, or maybe not, I don't know. But several months ago, I was starting to become interested in a girl. And this is something that's happened to me many times in my life. And there was a disappointing moment where it's like, it wasn't going to happen. I pursued it and it was like, no, it's not going to happen. And I had started feeling more and more intense about her. But when I reflect on that same experience just 10 years earlier and the agony of intense pain and pleasure together that happened when I was 26 or 7 versus like, it was much more of the dulled down. It was still sad and painful. But it was, it was not the intensity that I felt, like the just raw, I want to jump off a bridge. I want to rip my skin off. Like my skin tingled, like it's still there. It was sad, those types of things, but it was dulled down a little bit, just a little bit. Like it just, is more bearable in a sense, is another thing that, maybe comes with it. And I just thought about like, I was, this is maybe the annoying thing about being philosophical or poetical. And your thinking is, I was having that experience about this woman this was happening. And and then I was able to like get an out of body experience and then have a regret that it wasn't as intense. So I was like, I was able to remove myself and think like, damn, like, why isn't this more intense? Why am I not more disappointed? More like my life is over. This is again, like that youthful intensity. And, but I thought the other thing is, so like our love affairs as intense as they were. I don't know, not in my experience. They're really intense. I still love love affairs. But like when I was 20, that was like ecstatic to the nth degree in a way that it's died down a little bit. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. And so I really think about this a lot, about the dying down of it. And I think about like Ayn Rand's the fire, right? Don't let your spark burn out, your flame burn out, sparked by irreplaceable spark. And I think like, but there is a sense where as you get older, like there has to be an inevitable decline of a little bit of a shading off where it's not as intense.
There's a maturing.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think it's maturing, maybe part of it. But again, what are you losing? You're losing the intensity. The intensity felt good. Like I don't know if tell me if you did this ever, if you've ever done this with a love interest that didn't work out, where you almost wanted to relish in the horrible pain. Oh, you almost wanted to extend the horrible pain, right? Because it was something, it was an emotion. And you just like wallowed around like, oh, she doesn't understand me. And you're just like, why?
Yeah.
And you just wanted, and like I was like, no, if I felt it and I acknowledged it, it's like I felt this before and I moved on. Which it made me a little sad. Like I kind of missed that wallowing around for some reason. Like it was like, that was cool. It was part of, but it's part of the sober mature. So it's one, you could just say, oh, that's sober maturity. But part of what I think poetry and literature allows you to do is to really experience that again, to feel it, to kind of bring it back full. Don't just write it off as in a single word.
Yeah,
it's just maturity.
You're right. And even if it is like, just maturing, like I think poetry gives us a chance to experience the emotions anyway and reflect on them. And it gives us an opportunity to actually think about them when we don't normally do so, right? We don't usually have an occasion to talk about this kind of topic.
Yeah.
Right. This isn't like a Seinfeld scenario where it's like something that happens every day and it's like super trivial comes up.
Great analogy. Great
right?
I like that.
It's like the opposite of Seinfeld. It's like you have to really dig.
Poetry is definitely the opposite of Seinfeld. Yeah, I agree.
You have to dig deep.
Although I will say that there can be great poetry about everyday stuff, to be fair. Just not this poem.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I understand what you're saying. So I don't want to, throw Seinfeld under the bus. there's nothing wrong with the everyday. And in fact, a lot of beautiful poetry can. So scratch a lot of what I just said.
But to that extent, the beauty of the everyday poetry is that it goes deeper into the everyday scenarios than we would normally do so, right?
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily make fun of it all the time and make it feel silly. Like it could be reverential, like a time to stop. Like I read a poem today from a friend about the biography of a cloud. And I thought it was, lovely, just about pausing and looking at a cloud.
Bozo? Bozo the clown?
Cloud.
Oh, a clown.
The biography of a cloud.
I thought you said
Billy Collins. Yeah, I thought it was a lovely poem, and it was very simple. It was just about a cloud. That you see all the time, right? You see clouds all the time. But it was done well, and it was a moment of reverential pausing, I thought, in a beautiful description. I would recommend reading it. It doesn't take a lot of time. And it's a modern one too. It's 1995.
Hey, we're not advertising other poems in this reading of this poem, Kirk. That's not allowed here.
Okay.
Hey.
But anyway,
they'll get their chance.
Yeah, they'll get their chance. So yeah, was there anything else you wanted? Of course, there's a lot of other things to talk about in this poem, but was there anything else that you were interested in? That struck you?
I think we hit a lot of the really interesting and thought-evoking parts about this it's definitely going to make me want to read this again and think more on it. And I don't know if this is irony, but you reading this poem to me, having had read it several times in the past, is basically you taking me to the proverbial abbey, and watching my experience with your unborrowed visions.
Hopefully unborrowed a little bit. Yeah, I'll borrow it from Wordsworth from time to time.
Yeah.
So like here, when you read it again, check out this paragraph, this section a little bit. And then after, this is to his sister, and after years when these wild ecstasies. So this is his advice to his sister, which I love. When these wild ecstasies shall be matured into a sober pleasure, when thy mind shall be a mansion I love that analogy of the mind to a mansion. I don't know if he's the first one to do that. I think Dyer, there's a poet called Edward Dyer who did a poem called My Mind to Be a Kingdom Is. I think that's 16th century. But that kind of analogy, with all these lovely forms, like the idea of putting all these forms and your experiences with these things in your mind, the memory be as a dwelling place for all sweet sounds. Oh, then so again, this is what he said at the beginning, right? If solitude or fear or pain or grief should be your portion, you should experience that. With what healing thoughts of tender joy will thou remember me? And these my exhortations. It's all about him in the end. But John Keats called him the poet of the egotistical sublime. He is the poet of the egotistical sublime.
Amazing.
It's always about Wordsworth. It's always about Wordsworth. He wrote a whole poem, an epic poem, his only epic poem about the growth of a poet's mind. And guess what poet he was talking about? Himself. A whole poem called The Prelude, one of the greatest romantic poems of the Romantic era, an English Romantic era. And it's about his mind and about his experiences in life. It's a biography, basically. And it's awesome. Like, as objective, so you got to appreciate it.
Yeah. Nothing necessarily arrogant about that. If you're good. So
he knew he was good.
So push it.
He knew it. All right. Well, thank you for experiencing that for the second time, or my experiencing through you, and I got to see the shooting lights of thy wild ecstasies as we experienced this poem. And hopefully you'll read it again and again. And it'll, again, like I said, it's been a year since I've read it. And I've read it many times in the past. So it's nice to revisit it. So thank you for helping me revisit it.
And thank you, Kirk, for your guide, your Wordsworth-like slight direction through this amazing new poem that I will remember forever.
Good. All right. Thank you, everybody. All right. We'll see you all next time, and have a great week.